All right, hi, I'm Zach Steele, and this is the start of a series to hopefully help you guys win your league.
Yeah, and I'm Tyler Hobart, and we love fantasy football.
All right, so yeah, please be sure to drop a like or click subscribe, and if you have any feedback, hit us up in the comments. We're new to this, so we're just trying to give you guys the best content we can.
hmm
All righty. So today we're just going to go through a list of players that each of us believe either are going to drastically overperform their value or drastically underperform, and then we're going to run through why and kind of debate why. So we'll start right here. These are 5 guys that I'm targeting in every draft. In no particular order, but I am particularly high on DeVante Parker. But along with him, there's Stefon Diggs, Hayden Hurst, Jordan Howard, and Brandon Cooks.
Budget,
Um,
budget, budget.
you can't really lose if you get him that cheap.
Nope.
Anyway, so for DeVante Parker, believe it or not, from weeks 5 to 17, he was actually the number 2 receiver in PPR scoring behind Michael Thomas. So, but it goes Michael Thomas, obviously, who was far and away better than DeVante Parker, but Parker was number 2. And what's significant about that 5 to 17 week span is that was those were the weeks that Ryan Fitzpatrick was the official starter for the Dolphins, and they've announced him as their week 1 starter for 2020. So it's reasonable to expect that his report should carry over into this season. I know a lot of people are worried about Preston Williams coming in and stealing targets, Mr. Hobart himself included. But I think it's important to remember that one, he's coming off of a torn ACL, so there's no guarantee he's himself. And
I agree.
regardless of that, the Dolphins are a bad team. They're going to have to pass the ball a lot, and Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't afraid to throw it up there. And DeVante Parker's certainly a guy that can go do that. And it's not like his talent's a shocker. He was the 14th overall pick in the 2015 draft, and at the time, nobody was shocked by that pick. So there's no reason to believe that he can't continue producing the way he did. And on
The
top of
biggest
that,
thing is Fitzpatrick. How
sure,
long can he stay there? And hope, because he's going to be great under Fitzpatrick, but I
for
wonder
sure,
how
yeah.
long the Dolphins want to roll with him.
Yeah, I mean, say, because they start out the schedule pretty easy, and with Fitzpatrick under the helm, if you want to try and move him week 5 or 6 after he's racked up a couple 20-point games, I don't think I'd be opposed to that, but he's going to start out the season hot, and something you want to start
hmm
every is just rack up wins to get you into the playoffs, and you can work from there. Cool. So the next guy I have is Stefon Diggs. He's super cheap. He's going for like $8 in auction draft and being drafted as wide receiver 27, which is criminally low for a guy that's broken 1,000
Yeah.
yards year after year. And
So we like auctions. So it's going to be, we won't necessarily give you rounds that we took players in. We
for sure,
prefer auctions. So
but
we think he's dead cheap.
he's so cheap. Josh Allen, whether or not he's good at it, loves to throw the ball deep, and he's got a cannon of an arm. He only checked the ball down 6 times last season, which is a big knock on their running back, Zach Moss and Singletary, although I like both of those guys. Um, they they didn't just give Diggs, or they didn't just give the Vikings all that trade value for Diggs just so he could be
Mhm.
a play action threat whenever they
They
decide to
want to
pass
throw
the
the ball.
ball. They're going to throw the ball, and a lot of people forget that they've got John Brown as a great compliment to him, and Cole Beasley's no slouch in the middle, and Dawson
Mhm.
Knox is actually a sneaky
He's a great
breakout.
tight end.
He's a breakout candidate at tight end, although not my favorite, as you'll see later in the video. But and in general, when a team goes out and trades that much for a player, whether or not it's smart, they're going to do their best to get him involved just to make themselves look better. You could look back to a couple years ago with Amari Cooper and the Cowboys. Right away, that man was getting 10 plus targets a week and almost force fed the ball. And I'd say even like Dak made bad decisions that year several times throwing the ball to him. And Saquon Barkley, the same thing in his rookie year. A lot of GMs and analysts knocked the Giants for taking Barkley over a quarterback that year, but they made sure to feed him the rock, and he was an elite running back that season just because he was given the ball so often. And on top of that, Diggs is wide receiver 27 at his ADP right now, and if he's a bust, so what? You missed out on a late round draft pick or $8 in fantasy, but he could legitimately lead the AFC in receiving yardage this year.
Yeah, he'll definitely do better than 27. Is the gist here with Stefon.
For sure. Now here's a guy that I am all in on. I'm targeting him in every draft, and I'll reach on him in Snake, and I'll overpay in auction just because I really think he's going to be a top 5 fantasy tight end this season, and that's Hayden Hurst. From weeks 1 to 10 last season, believe it or not, Hooper was tight end 1 in PPR scoring, and he got hurt in week 10, and that's why I believe he slipped to 5th or 6th over the course of the season because he missed a couple weeks, but Hooper is gone now, and that vacated 97 targets, and he was averaging, like, had he played every game, I think he was on pace for around 120, and that's a hell of a target share for a tight end. That's on level with
Matt
Kelce.
Ryan loves his tight ends.
That's on par with what Kelce and Kittle get, and I can't say particularly that Hooper was that great because he's so talented, because if that were the case, Austin Hooper would be going a lot higher in fantasy drafts because the Browns also like to throw the ball around, and they
paid him a lot.
They paid him a lot, so you'd think that they would be looking to get him the ball, but if that were the case, he'd be going a lot higher. So I don't think anybody's out here thinking that Hooper is that much better than Hayden Hurst. So there's no reason to expect that Hurst can't do what Hooper did.
He was huge for Lamar.
He was, and it's funny because he only played 40% of the snaps in Baltimore, but he still averaged 11 yards per catch. But he really was there used as a run blocker. And what's great about a tight end that can block is that means they're never going to have to take him off the field. So anytime there's an audible from a run play, he's there. And you've got Julio and Ridley on the outside. I don't think the defense is ever going to be too worried about Hurst. So Matt Ryan's going to be capable of just dumping it down to him every single play. And at tight end 13, that's just criminally low ADP. There's no shock for me if he finishes top 5, even above Ertz. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him finish 3 behind Kittle and Kelce.
I like it a lot.
So next guy I love here is Jordan Howard. I say, can you say poor man's Leonard Fournette? And that's because whether or not he's going to be efficient doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously you want him to be, but he's going to be given the rock 15 times a game plus, because he's really the only running back on that roster that's shown the ability to get the ball and carry it and stay healthy throughout the course of a season. Obviously, they traded a 5th round pick for Matt Breida this season, and he's going to siphon a lot of receptions throughout the season, and that certainly limits Howard's ceiling, although I can't say Breida's necessarily got a clean bill of health. He's been in and out of games with ankle issues throughout his career. So if you're betting on one of these running backs to play 16 games, it's Howard, and
he's going to be a workhorse for them. He's been a guy that can consistently rush well.
And again, he's being drafted as the 34th best player at his position. So it's like
no one near him gets the kind of volume that Howard will see like week 1.
Anybody employing 0 RB, like sure, maybe his ceiling's around RB 15 because he's not going to be involved in the passing game and he's not going to be in an offense that scores too much. So I don't expect him to get too many touchdowns, but you can get him late or for dirt cheap in auction and he's going to produce, and he's going to be a guy that you can plug into your lineup week after week and expect 10 to 15 points out of. And the last guy is Brandon Cooks here, and this is a guy that I just can't get over how underrated he is. The Texans traded for him after obviously sending DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals for God knows what reason. But that vacated on whatever. That left 150 targets in that system to get split up between the new receivers this year, and everyone's been a lot higher on Fuller than Cooks, but I don't think you can very safely say that Fuller is going to play 16 games. Historically, he's played about 2/3 of the games throughout the year, and I believe he only played 7 last season. So for whatever games that Fuller's gone, Cooks and Cobb are the only established receivers in an offense that you know is going to put up points with an elite quarterback there. And outside of last year, Cooks had 3 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons, I believe, in those 3 years. On average, he's wide receiver 8 in PPR. Like, the man has been traded for first-round picks twice in his career and then traded again this year. So he's got talent. he's been moved around and he's succeeded everywhere he's been. So there's no reason to expect him to have a down year just because he's on a new system, because he knows the drill there. And again, he's being drafted at wide receiver 37, which there's just no way the only way he performs lower than that is if he gets hurt or has lingering concussion issues. But again, you get him with that low draft capital, you're not sinking yourself if you draft him and he's a bust.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Where's these guys coming up?
So yeah, these are guys that, although sure they could be better than all 5 of those guys I listed previously, they're just, in my opinion, not worth the value you're getting. So Juju, big knocks on him for me are, one, Big Ben's coming back from an injury, so it's just tough to know how well he's going to perform. And you saw how much of just the disaster that offense was without him. And on top of that, DeVante Johnson actually, he had 10.2 PPR fantasy points per game last season, and Juju had 9.7, and James Washington had 9.4. So Juju was dangerously close to being the 3rd best receiver on his own roster. So, I mean, sure, he's got the best rapport with Big Ben because he's been there before, but like, you can get DeVante Johnson super late or spend a 3rd-round pick or $40 in auction on Juju. I don't think it's really much of a question which way you're going to go there. Another guy I hate is Mike Evans. He's a great player. There's no doubt in my mind about that, but he's being drafted right after Godwin, and he just isn't a guy that I see really thriving in Tom Brady run offense. Tom Brady is a big fan of getting quick passes off and dump downs to running backs and a lot of the underneath stuff. And Mike Evans is more of the deep threat in that roster. Mike Evans is certainly going to have his games, but it wouldn't shock me to see a lot of goose eggs or really low scoring performances out of Mike Evans. So even though he might have a couple weeks where he wins it for you, you're spending a 2nd or 3rd round pick on a guy that at least every other week I don't see surpassing 10 points, just because Godwin and
we've seen that for years with Evans, with a quarterback that loves to throw the deep ball a lot more. So,
and another guy I'm super just against is Melvin Gordon. I actually rostered him in a couple leagues of mine last year, and I mean, obviously I wasn't happy with how he performed there, but I just don't really see the fit for him. Maybe, but I just don't really see the fit for him in Denver. One, there's no guarantee he's even the lead back. Phillip Lindsay's coming off of 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and Royce Freeman isn't a slouch himself. And they've also got 3 very capable receivers. They got Hamler, Jerry Jeudy, and obviously Courtland Sutton, and then Noah Fant isn't a slouch either. So I can't say he's necessarily going to get the rock a bunch when they're passing, which is where most of the value comes from, especially in PPR. And on top of that, with Melvin, he's been, what made him salvageable last year was he had several games with 1-yard touchdown runs, I think. And that's not necessarily sustainable. Touchdowns are super fluky, and I think in general it's safe to say he went to a worse offense, although the Chargers weren't very prolific either last year. The Broncos aren't going to be winning many shootouts this year, and it's going to be hard for Melvin to get the 10 touchdowns he needs to meet his ADP. And another guy I'm against, although despite believing he's very talented, is Kenyon Drake. One, he's in an offense that I see being very pass heavy, and although that's nice if you're a PPR back, he's got a really great backup / handcuff in Chase Edmonds there, who Kingsbury himself has come out and said he sees starter potential in. And I'm not here saying that Kenyon Drake's going to cede the starting role to Chase Edmonds, but it's tough to see Drake really being a true workhorse. And I especially see
he's expensive.
He's expensive is basically what it is. With what you're paying for him, if he performs at his ceiling, you get your value back. But for him to drastically exceed his ADP, I think would be really difficult. It would take either a really historic usage in the passing game or an injury to Chase Edmonds or something. But I think it's far more likely that he finishes as a low-end RB2 than a top-tier running back. So it's just a guy that I'm not necessarily looking
at. And the division, that division though.
the defenses are pretty elite in that division, outside of the
Yeah, I've
Seahawks.
seen them a
But
lot.
and then lastly, this is a little controversial, but I'm really avoiding Lamar in every draft this year. For starters, if I'm gonna spend premium draft capital on a quarterback, which in general most people will tell you is a horrible idea, I can't necessarily see there being any good reason to go with him over Mahomes. Mahomes has shown that he can do it over the course of several years. I like Mahomes' options in the passing game a lot more. And even in the playoffs last year, you saw Mahomes start to run the ball a little more. I'm not going to say that that really carries over because those were must-win games, and you often see quarterbacks start scrambling more when there's more of a impact that it can have on the game. But I just don't see Lamar. There's no way he does what he did last year, which was obviously a historic season and MVP worthy. But the man takes a lot of hits, and I don't see that being something that the Ravens really want to continue. So I see him probably dialing back the frequency at which he's running the ball. And again, it's another off season for defenses to figure him out. You saw
He'll be great, but just like it's tough to expect him to
so
really like make you a
like
winner with how much you spent.
like I put him in more of a tier with Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson, and I put Mahomes in his owns, and you can get those other three quarterbacks for way cheaper, way later in the draft. So I just don't see a good reason to spend a premium draft capital on Lamar.
Agreed.
Cool. Here's Tyler's.
So Zach went all budget, but I'm starting off with Michael Thomas. I got Austin Ekeler, Chris Carson, Michael Gallup, and the counter to DeVante Parker, which is Preston Williams for a tenth of the price. So to start with Michael, so you're not really going to get great value here. You're not necessarily you're going to pay big, the number one wide receiver off the board, but for a good reason. For years and years and years, this guy has been incredible. And to start off, he broke the NFL record for NFL receptions. That's just amazing. And obviously, I don't think he's going to do it again, or even really get close to 149. But he's going to be very, very good. And the only players that came close to him as a wide receiver were DeAndre Hopkins and Keenan Allen at 104 receptions. And those guys are great wide receivers.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And they were just outclassed. So like my thing with Michael Thomas is if you can get him for fair value, especially in auction, because our auction, he could get ran up, and I'm not saying you should pay for that, but he's going to do incredible. And I think he still is going to be on Breeze's radar every single play. And the man's mad on social media. He doesn't like the disrespect. So he's going to go out there and you can't guard him.
Yeah,
That's my case for Michael.
The only thing that worries me about him is Breeze isn't getting any younger, and Emmanuel Sanders should decrease the
Sanders,
target share
I really
a little
like
bit.
Sanders too.
Mm-hmm.
So Sanders is definitely going to eat into that. And really, I expect Kamara to do better in the passing game this year as well.
Sure, yeah.
But I still think if you need a wide receiver out of those guys, and that first class wide receiver, like you can't do better, and you can't even really get close to Michael Thomas,
he could lose 50 targets this season and still lead the league in receptions. So there's no reason to fade him at all.
I could make a couple of slides. This guy's incredible. So Michael Thomas is someone I'm looking at every single draft, because if I can get him for a decent value and snake or auction, I'm taking him because I know he's going to perform for me.
For sure.
So Austin Ekeler, I had him last year, huge breakout. This guy was incredible every time he touched the ball. And really that's my thing, is he didn't touch the ball enough, in my opinion, last year.
For sure.
And Melvin Gordon just came in there and took way too many touches from this man. And I don't necessarily draft him to be your halfback, but I'm big on running backs that can catch the ball. And like this guy, I think, is going to outperform his crazy line outside of what ESPN has him underperforming, mostly due to the quarterback position. Like, I don't know why they had a lot of faith in Rivers really propping up that line, in my opinion.
For sure.
But I just see Ekeler. I mean, look at him. He's ready. And he's going to outperform. He had incredible lines. And I think if you want to budget McCaffrey, Like, because really the thing for me with Ekeler is the ADP is like he's just going cheaper than guys like Kenyon Drake and Miles Sanders, and that just doesn't really
For
make
sure.
sense
I mean,
to
I'm
me.
pretty sure he finished RB4 last year. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so he finished RB4, and Melvin Gordon had infinitely more touches than I think he deserved. So I don't necessarily think Eckler's going to get a ton of touches and a three downs as a 3-down back. I think getting Justin Jackson is 100% necessary for Eckler. But if you want a guy that's significantly going to outperform running back 13, I think it's Eckler. And I'm all over this man. I love him.
for sure, I agree.
And Chris Carson. So Chris Carson, another guy where I think you're going to get great value because really he's being disrespected by the injuries, in my opinion, the fumbles, and what appears to be a crowded backfield in Seattle between Penny, which I think Penny's still recovering heavily from that injury, and he's not going to be rushed into a lead back role. And so I think Carson run, pass, punt. As much as we want to see Russ cook, I think Carson's still going to get a lot of carries, and I don't think he has 7-8 fumbles this year.
For
And
sure.
I think, again, we don't love the touchdown stat, but I think he didn't get enough last year. And
Hmm.
so I think ultimately my premise is I think Carson stays healthy, and if you can get him at 16 or lower, I think he's going to do really well for you in an offense that unquestionably loves to run the ball way more than it should. So Chris Carson is a guy I'm looking to get. If I can get him for good value, I think he's
For
going to be
sure.
a lot better than some of those expensive running backs you'll pay for. He's proven
For sure.
this man's great. So Chris
And
Carson is a guy
he's
I
being
like.
drafted around guys like Fournette and Gurley who,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, maybe the upside's greater with those two guys, but at
Totally.
least with Carson, I can guarantee it, the coaching staff wants him to
That's
be on
yeah.
the team, which can't be said about Fournette. And I can say he's healthier than Gurley, so totally can
Mm-hmm.
understand drafting him over those guys.
When he started fumbling, they still gave him the ball. So
Yeah,
Pete Carroll loves running the ball, and he loves Chris Carson. The whole offense trusts him and is behind him. So I think he's going to get a lot of carries, and he's been incredible between missed tackles and a terrible line, but still his yards after contact's been great. I think it was like 3.2, which is like amazing. So I think Chris Carson's a great player and a great value.
for sure.
And Michael Gallup, another great player. So I love Michael Gallup just because I think he's young, he's incredibly talented, and he's going far lower than Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is a big, big name, and you're paying for that name, whereas I don't think you're paying for a name with Michael Gallup. So he had 66 receptions last year to Cooper's 79. Very, very comparable, yet his average draft position is 32 compared to Cooper's 10. That's quite a steal, especially considering how cheap I think wide receivers are compared to their running back counterparts. And I think Dak had a great year. Dak's a great quarterback, and that offense loves to pass. And Dak loves passing to Gallup. He's very, very talented. His yards were very comparable to Cooper, and as well as touchdowns. I think he had 6 touchdowns last year, and Cooper had 8.
For sure.
So
And I
I
mean,
love Gallup's value.
I agree. I mean, a lot of people like to knock on him because I believe he had a 3 touchdown game with 150 yards in week
He did
17.
have an insane
So
game, but
people like to say
so
that
is Cooper. So
take that out, and he wasn't as elite as
mm-hmm.
he was, but Cooper himself is boomer bust, and I don't see
Mm-hmm.
CeeDee Lamb coming in and taking any targets away.
No, not this year at least. So I
Yeah.
think in an offense that wants to pass,
Hmm.
and Cooper not only in drafts but on the field will get a lot of attention. I think Gallup is going to be great for
For sure.
Dak and great for fantasy if you can get him at wide receiver 32 or anywhere around there. I think he's a great pick.
Totally agree.
And Preston Williams. So you and I are both pretty high on the Dolphins offense, at least being pass heavy and at least having, I think, a good quarterback in Fitzpatrick. So I think Preston Williams will be great value because especially if you're in auction, you might get this guy for $1. And you might pay 10 for Preston. Either way, I think Preston's great at that value. But if you want a guy to take a fly on who's incredibly talented, who's proven he can do things, yes, the ACL is a bit scary, But ultimately, I think this is like an overperform for Preston Williams, where when he was playing, he was the lead wide receiver for them. And for me, and with Fitzpatrick being the guy there too, that's something I'm reading into here is
Mm-hmm.
I think Preston will ultimately gobble up a lot of targets. I'm not saying he's going to be better than DeVante Parker. He's probably not. DeVante's pretty awesome. But this could be a great flex player, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that you'll get for free.
Yeah, you can't argue with the price tag at all.
Mm-hmm. And then the players I'm avoiding. So none of these players I don't think are going to be terrible. They're just quite expensive and they will cost you early. And ultimately, I don't like that will affect if you're able to build out a really great roster. And so Mike Evans being one of them, just because I think Chris Godwin's going for the same price essentially, and he's going to be a lot better in that offense, I think, and a lot more consistent. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, out of all the players we look at, we want really consistent players that week to week. Mike Evans hasn't been great consistently. He's an amazing player, but not consistently. And I don't think Brady is going to, again, consistently let him have those huge games for you. And Miles Sanders, you are paying a lot of money, at least what I'm looking at. And I just, out of all the running backs I think you can get late that will give you a great floor in PPR,
Mm-hmm.
I think Sanders has a lot of hype, and I'm ultimately not buying into that price tag and that Eagles offense.
For sure. He's already got
I
like
just don't
an
really
injury
see
in
it.
camp, and
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's the injuries for me. Like, obviously, I'd love to assume every single player is healthy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't necessarily want to knock players for their injury, how like injury prone they could be, or especially in camp right now. But I do think Sanders is really, really expensive, and you can get a lot of great backs for cheaper that may do better. At best, Sanders gets what you paid for here.
Yep.
Same with Clyde. So Clyde, I'm just it's tough because it's tough for me to like buy into rookies,
Mm-hmm.
and so I do think that Chiefs offense is unquestionably explosive,
Oh, for sure.
and he's gonna probably be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But like he has a lot of hype to where it's like it's hard for me to say I'm like ever really targeting him in a draft, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why I'm avoiding him. And so I think that's different. We don't have love or hates, but it's just players where it's like, I'll let other people like take a
For
chance on
sure.
him. And for me, it's on with Clyde because really it's just I don't know what he's gonna do yet in that offense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how good he's gonna be, how much volume he's get, and so I'm mostly staying away from Clyde. Zach Ertz is another guy where I'm like, he's very, very expensive. And I think there's a lot of tight ends this year tight end is a weird position, and every roster and league is a bit different. But
Mm-hmm.
I think Zach Ertz is someone where you'll like spend significant capital on kind of early I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm like what, top 4 tight end right now?
Yeah,
Where
I think he's ahead of Andrews even. I think he's 3.
yes, so yeah, right now he's ahead of Andrews, you're right. And for me, that just doesn't really compute. And so I think you can get a lot of guys really cheap, really late, practically free that I'm willing to take the chance on week in, week out and just cycle them. And
Oh, for
Zach
sure.
Ertz is not a guy I want like bragging about on my team. Like when I can get some great wide receivers and even some
Mm-hmm.
great PPR running backs in those
Especially with Goddard
rounds.
there and this being a contract year for Ertz. I know it's a
I
contract
love
year for
Goddard.
it's a contract year for both of them, but I think the Eagles and everybody else know that Goddard's going to come a lot cheaper after this year. So
Hmm.
why not look and see what they have in Goddard more than they have previously? I know
And he
that
was great last year.
he was.
So
I mean, they drafted him, I want to say, in the first round. So he's got talent. Not
mhm.
to say Zach Ertz doesn't, but again, he's going to come at a higher price tag. It's the Eagles might be taking the same approach Tyler's taking here, where why take Ertz at a high price tag when you can get Goddard for cheap?
And ultimately, I expect the Eagles wide receivers to improve.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I don't expect them to be insanely tight end dependent like they were, especially late in last season.
For sure.
So that like Ertz was just a monster because that he was the only body. So
Mm-hmm.
then there's DJ Moore where I'm just like, why not give me? It's a similar thing with Amari Cooper here where I would love to get Curtis Samuel, as opposed to DJ Moore. DJ Moore is going as like a top 10 wide receiver, right? In like
Yeah.
ESPN formats. And like I don't see it, especially when your quarterback's Teddy Bridgewater. And he was great, but in an amazing and a well-run team in New Orleans. And
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see that, especially with a huge contract. And with a guy like Christian McCaffrey, I just don't see
Mm-hmm.
DJ Moore really playing up to a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. I just don't see it with Teddy Bridgewater. And really for the value, I'm looking elsewhere. And so that's why I'm avoiding
Yeah,
DJ Moore. I just don't see the hype. I don't see it.
I just don't see that offense scoring enough outside of McCaffrey
Mm-mm.
to like. I think he's got 6 touchdowns over his first 2 seasons, and I don't see him getting more than 6 this year. So
Mm-hmm.
it's tough to
I
see him performing above guys around him.
I just don't see anyone being the center of that offense other than Christian McCaffrey.
For
So
sure. Mm-hmm.
it's tough to like say you can't be like the focal point, in my opinion, and like be
Mm-hmm.
top 10 with Teddy Bridgewater. Like you're gonna have to throw the ball on.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm okay with being wrong on all of these guys
Yeah.
because I just don't want to pay
Mm-hmm.
those prices because I think this year you can get a lot of great floor players, a lot of great depth, and build out a great roster. So those are players I'm avoiding, like CCL.
All right. So yeah, that's gonna be pretty much it for the video. I'm Zach. He's Tyler.
I'm Tyler.
So
Follow us
yeah,
Twitter, RealSteel.
yeah. We're pretty new. Please give us any feedback you have, like and subscribe. Obviously, this is just a start. We'll be getting more, I guess, technologically adept in this field as we go, and we'll be growing as our following does. So thank you guys.
Peace.